If you have ever been involved in the planning of a funeral, you know that those services come at a cost. And sometimes the cost can be quite significant at a time in which there are a lot of emotions going around, obviously. How much does it cost? What should you know in advance to plan for that cost? Are there ways you can minimize that cost with some planning and some tough choices before you need to make those tough choices? Our guest is Shawn Davidson. He is a licensed funeral director. He also manages Carruthers and Davidson Funeral Home, and he joins us from Stayner, Ontario. Hello there.
Hello, Bruce. Thanks for having me.
We talk about everything on this show. There is nothing that's off limits. And I think it's really important for people to have the conversation about the costs of a funeral before, the loved one has died and you're in someone's office faced with, the pressure of making some pretty tough decisions under a time constraint. So that's the background. Let me start with a question, which is to say, what is the average cost of a funeral in Canada? And I know there's obviously a huge range, but what would be the number that we would start with just to get the conversation going?
Well, I think the number to start with to get the conversation going would be for the most basic of services. So that's not a funeral, but a disposition. The person passes away, we arrange for their cremation, we return the cremated remains to someone. In Canada, that's going to be somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500. So that's your starting point. That's your most basic. Once you start talking about a funeral and caskets and burial and so on, it can be 8, 10, 12, even more.
Right. And we know that that the funerals that people are hosting today are more complex maybe than they would have included a generation ago. A generation ago, no one was trying to live stream this event. There was not those sorts of things. As the costs move up, you mentioned a couple of things. What are the variables on that, brochure that take the estimate to a much higher level? Would it be things like, renting the room at the funeral home in order to have the celebration of life? Give us some sense for where some of those larger costs come from.
Sure. So just like any other profession, you're paying for what you get, right? The more you want, the more it's going to cost. So from the services perspective, so the services being provided to you, yes, there are facility charges, staffing charges for time. Pricing is basically based on an hourly rate. So if you want 2 hours of visitation, or if you want 2 days of time for people to gather, the price is going to be different. Then you move into the merchandise, the items that you select. Caskets, start about $1,000 for a casket. Cremation containers that the public aren't going to see are less expensive, but caskets can range up to, you can spend $10,000, $12,000 just on a casket. Then you get into food and refreshments and beverages and stemware rentals and all those things that you would associate with other types of celebrations and gatherings, whether it be weddings or baptisms or bar mitzvahs or whatever that event may be. This isn't much different from a breaking down of cost perspective.
There has been more and more people have made a choice to have cremation instead of a traditional burial. What do you think is behind that shift?
I think the first item that started the cremation trend years ago was land costs, cemetery fees in an urban center. You can come up here to rural Ontario. We're near Collingwood, Wasaga Beach area, and you can purchase a grave in a cemetery for $1,500 to have your loved one buried. If you're at Mount Pleasant or the west end of Toronto at Park Lawn Cemetery, that exact same square footage of land is going to cost you north of $30,000.
Wow.
So if you don't have the plot already, then cremation can be much more viable. Cremation, again, up in our area, a lot of people have retired here. They don't necessarily have roots here. Their family's still in the GTA, closer to the city. So when they pass away, are their kids going to come up here to visit at a gravesite? Probably not. Let's cremate. We're much more portable at that point. The urn can be kept at home. It can be taken back to the city when that time comes.
Mm.
Uh, and
With
then
any major purchase, of course, someone like me is going to say, shop around, shop around, shop around for your car, shop around for your mortgage, shop around for any big expense. Funerals are a big expense. If someone had the wherewithal or the advanced planning, what would they notice between service providers? How close is pricing, aside from the regional dynamic, which you mentioned, the cost of land, but other areas? Is there much difference in price?
I would suggest that there can be, and a lot of it has to do with the building, the facilities, the number of staff, the attention that you're paying for. Our regulator, the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, has mandated that all funeral home price lists, if you have a website, must be available on your website. So your listeners, your viewers, they can simply go to the funeral home of their choice, and right on the homepage should be a tab that says our price list. They can download that price list. Our regulator does not govern what we charge, but they do govern how we display our charges. So with a little bit of effort, you can put 3 or 4 on a table and you can kind of put a price together. But that being said, we're happy to sit with you at no cost or obligation to give you an exact quote once we have that conversation. Because like any big purchase, communication is the key.
Yeah. There is also, it would seem to me that there's an advantage to advanced planning. Like if we can plan out major purchases, there are some efficiencies we could find. We also wouldn't be trying to make these big decisions under duress. Like, what would mom want? What would dad want? What are some tips that you have for families and for individuals about how to get as ahead of this as you can, such that you're not paying at the highest level?
So you brought up a very sensitive and very good topic, Bruce, is that having the communication within the family so that people don't have to guess what mom or dad would have wanted. That's the start. The second is having the communication between the elderly person or the person that's not well and the rest of the family to understand what they need moving forward after that person passes. And then sitting down with a funeral home or a couple of different funeral homes, viewing their facilities, talking through, what options they need and what they don't need. Our pricing is all broken down, so you should not be paying for something that you don't need or that you're not going to get.
What does financing look like in this day and age? I mean, you can get a car loan, you can get a loan for a furnace, you can get a loan for orthodontics. Is there financing in the funeral sector?
There is. So you can come in, you can make pre-arrangements in advance. You don't have to pay in advance. You can make a lump sum payment to pay for it its entirety, or those payments can be spread out over a number of years. Depending on the length of time, you may be contributing to the growth of that investment. Because under our legislation, when we enter into a contract with someone, the price becomes guaranteed. So if you want to make payments over 10 years, so husband and wife come in, the husband just writes a check and pays for it. The wife decides, no, I'm going to pay for it over 5 years. At the end of that 5-year period, their values should be the same, right? So the wife is making contribution payments to contribute to that growth as well. But once you have a contract, it is guaranteed, meaning that the accumulated value of the investment will cover inflationary costs in the future. So from an economic perspective, it can be a good investment.
It is one of the a short list of events in life in which the cost benefit doesn't live in the world of logic. It lives in some other world because we're talking about people's lives here and their legacy and emotion and family and all that stuff. That being said, what is the number one thing that you would encourage people, clients, to keep in mind as they think about the cost variable of a funeral?
The cost variable of a funeral. It's just making sure you're getting what you need and what you want, not getting something and having to pay for something that you don't need.
Yeah.
Or you didn't want.
It's a simple tip, but I think in this particular area, it's one that bears repeating, and we thank you for doing so.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it. Shawn Davidson is in Stayner, Ontario. He is licensed funeral director and owner and manager of Carruthers and Davidson. He was here to talk about funeral costs in this day and age and how to keep them under control.